Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for hanging in with us here. It's been a long day. Hopefully we'll push through here to dinner. Where'd Han go? You said scenario manager, you were a little scared of this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna be really scared. Today, Kelsey and I are going to walk through our experience optimizing alternative analyses in VISM using the scenario manager. To give quick brief introductions, my name is Noah Leonard. I'm out of the SRF Consulting Office in Madison, Wisconsin. I've been with the company for about 5 years now, working in various traffic engineering roles, but specifically modeling on this project here.
And I'm Kelsey Liburg. I'm also with SRF. I'm out of our Minneapolis office. I've been with SRF about 6.5 years, and I do a lot of the similar things as to Noah with the modeling.
So a quick overview of what we're going to talk through here. We'll give a brief project description, give you all set the scene where we're at, what we were doing and why we were doing it. We'll give a brief scenario manager overview. I guess real quick poll, who is familiar with scenario manager in VISM? Oh, okay. I should have typed that. We'll do a little bit of our workflow overview, talk about the project application, and then a few lessons learned at the end that I think will be helpful here for the group. So the project was Highway 50, US 51 in Madison, Wisconsin, Dane County, South Central Wisconsin. For those of you not too familiar, this was a NEPA project, and so the purpose and need of the project in totality here was focusing on vehicle and non-motorized user mobility with a focus and emphasis on bike ped safety. The project in total was about 5.5 miles. But our microsimulation limits, because the corridor is so different in environment, we have anything from the south here, we have freeway, urban sections, and then up to the north, we have more rural, 2-lane divided area shoulder sections. And so coordinating with WISDOT, our project partner here, we refined the microsimulation limits down to just about 1.7 miles, which did include 1 grade separated diamond interchange, 6 signals, 5 stop control intersections, an at-grade railroad crossing, and what we call here an adjacent urban corridor in the yellow there. Highway 51 intersects US 151 at about halfway through our VISM limits. This is a major intersection in Madison. For those of you not familiar, we live on an isthmus, and so ins and outs downtown are very limited. And 151 is the major artery into downtown, and then 51 provides that north and south connection. So that intersection in particular was of high interest to WISDOT, and we really wanted to make sure we included those urban limits so we could capture impacts upstream and downstream of this intersection.
So over the course of the project, we used 2 PTV software. The actual meat of the project, the results, the analysis was all done in VISM. But our turning movements we received in WISDOT were all just your standard hard-coded volumes, which needed to be translated to our matrix based routing in VISM. Each volume scenario or peak contained 6 different matrices per vehicle type, so a total of 12 per volume scenario, and all of these needed to be translated to a matrix. So we used Vizum to use the ODME procedure to help create this zone-to-zone network to actually bring these matrices into Vizum, which offered a much more seamless procedure than just trying to do something in a spreadsheet. And also we used a little bit older of a version of VISM, which was intentional due to some surrounding projects. Through WISDOT, they had expressed the desire to keep this consistent model so that they could integrate past modeling efforts in with our results later on, so they could have consistent results. And a quick overview of Scenario Manager in VISM, because you're all experts. Really in VISM, there are 3 main components to Scenario Manager. You've got your base network, and this is pretty much your most important aspect of Scenario Manager. It is your lays down all of the framework for everything moving forward. And any changes you make to your base network, especially once you have modifications already created, can create a domino effect through those modifications that can be really unintentional, especially if it's something that can cause that modification to actually error out. Your second part of your scenario manager is your modification. This is basically all of your instructions to how to change your base network. It can be as flexible as I want to just have a modification that changes all my priority rules and that's all I do, or I want a modification that changes everything associated with your build. And it also offers the flexibility of being able to stack those modifications to have as many changes as you want in that your final scenario. And then your last one, which you actually can run to get your results, is your scenario. It is the combination of your base network and all of your modifications that you have selected. It is traditionally what people think of when they think of a VISA model, because it is that final pretty picture that you can actually watch run.
So our presentation here is covering the processes, the whys of how we attack this project and why we like to use the scenario manager. So I want to set the stage here real quick. I'm sure in other agencies and state municipalities, they have similar model trees that we follow. WISDOT provides this model tree, and this is generally when using conventionally modeling methods. We'll follow this step ladder process to get models approved. When we look to calibrate existing conditions versus build versus future existing conditions. This is the standard step model tree that we follow. When we took a step back and wanted to reevaluate the process with the scenario manager, this is something we sort of developed in-house. It's nothing published that WISDOT says this is trying to do it, but this is how we approach the project with the scenario manager. As Kelsey mentioned, the base network is extremely important. Establishing that, creating a calibrated existing conditions base that allows you to manipulate and move forward, knowing that you have a strong base to build upon. So we took that base network and we'll dig into a little bit on the whys and how we broke out our modifications. But an example of a modification you could apply to that base network is your design year volumes. And so in our case, we used dynamic routing options. And so we took our 29 by 29 matrices, loaded those in as their own individual modification, and then we can apply that single modification to the existing conditions within the base network to create a seamless scenario for the design year, no build. Similarly, if we wanted to take that scenario and apply an additional modification, in this case, we talked about improved geometry. So sometimes when you have overcapacity limits with no build, you may create, tweak signal timings, you may adjust some don't block the box intersection attributes. And so we could apply that single modification set, the design your no build, to immediately have a no build approved, all off that base calibrated approved base network. The next step here, we kind of repeat it as necessary when we're developing build geometry and build scenarios. I'll get into a little bit more detail here, but applying the build geometry to the no build improved or strictly no build scenarios allowed us to just seamlessly check the box and apply these modifications to have scenarios that are understood by WISDOT. They, assuming they approve our base network, this is something they're comfortable with, and so the modifications are easily digestible when they're reviewed. So I mentioned we broke out our modifications, and when I talk about that, we separated how we were changing the model, the base network, and the modifications. We separated that into 3 buckets. The first one was any geometric changes we made into the model. We kept those as their own modifications. So anytime we adjusted a link, anytime we changed a number of lanes, connectors, we categorized all of those as geometric modifications. Strictly link geometric modifications in that bucket. Traffic modifications was any sort of modification we made to signal timings, sometimes attributes within the signal controller themselves, offsets, etc. We kept those as their own modifications, and that allowed us to apply those individually and independently of the geometric modifications. And then lastly, Kelsey mentioned we used some dynamic routing assessment. Our matrices, we kept those as their own modifications, allowing us to apply different vehicle volume scenarios independently of the other 2 buckets that we've already talked about here. getting into the project application piece of it, that first bucket, geometric modifications. We elected to break out all the geometry by intersection because we knew that WSDOT and the partners involved in this project were going to want to evaluate all of these intersections independently, but also together. So we could foresee some of this back and forth coming. So we kept our geometric modifications independent at each intersection. And so you can see over here on the left, there are two examples. We had a jug handle geometry for that main urban intersection. And then we also had a DDI modification for geometry on the southern limits of our model here. Both of those modifications were separate, but we could bring them, because they were separated, we could bring them together, the click of a button within the scenario manager. And then all of a sudden, we now have a third scenario here that we could run and say, for example, if WSDOT wants to see how the jug handle and the DDI run together, we can click the button and they're together and run that immediately upon execution. Talking about our traffic modifications, I mentioned signal timings. That was the biggest bonus, I guess, with separating these out, is that anytime we had signal modifications that we wanted to make, whether that was coordinating east-west versus north-south corridors, adjusting offsets, we had some rail preemption in here. Anytime we wanted to evaluate a different signal alternative, we could do that because, independent of the geometry, we could do that because these were all saved within their own modifications, nothing else in there. So that was important that we could evaluate how different signal patterns and timing scenarios evaluate different independently from our geometry and other assets. And then lastly, because we separated out our volumes from those other two components, let's say we wanted to run, for some reason, we wanted to run the existing condition volume set under a jug handle alternative, we could do that if we wanted to at the click of the button because the volumes were saved in their own modification. So anytime we wanted to load in these matrices, we would click on modification, load existing condition volumes, or load future design year volumes. This really streamlined the process, bucketing these up this way for future existing conditions. I think Kelsey will talk about that here. But this also allowed for easy sensitivity analyses. WSDOT had a couple of, because of that main intersection in the middle with Highway 51 and 151, there were a couple different sensitivity analysis scenarios they wanted to evaluate, and separating these volume modifications out from one another allowed us to run those with independent geometries, whether that was the jug handle, whether that was the no build, whether that was an improved existing condition. We could do that all independent of each other.
So some of the advantages that we found to using Scenario Manager was it really streamlined the process of being able to go straight from your calibrated to existing to a future to literally any build scenario you could think of. It created a comfort in our client that they could actually see what we were doing per modification and actually know that calibrated existing model that they signed off on was actually used for the no build with no changes whatsoever besides the volume and potentially signal timing. It also created the ability to have a single project file. So what historically was a just sea of endless project folders was now down to a single one. It saved a considerable amount of network storage to be able to just have that one base network and only have a minimal file size for just that little bit of a modification. And then also it created the ability to seamlessly mix and match geometries, or mostly seamlessly mix and match other modifications. So as Noah said, we could take that jug handle or that diverging diamond and we could just check a box and plug them together, where in a traditional approach without Scenario Manager, that would involve wholesale changes, copying. You would lose track of all the modifications and you would never have a exact complete version between the two. Some of the challenges that we did face, this was our first Scenario Manager project as a company, so there were some learning curves. Modeling hierarchy was one of our biggest ones, learning kind of the ins and outs of what modification is actually the controlling one, which ones take priority. That was a little bit of a learning curve. Work sharing was also kind of an issue with the ability to only have one person really doing anything on the project at a time, not being able to actually share. One person does this build, one person does that build. It's really kind of limited to just that one person. And it also kind of cuts down on the runtime a little bit because you only have the ability to run the one scenario at a time when if you have them broken up, then you can run them simultaneously. The nice thing about scenario manager is you can export a scenario to run it separately, but you do lose a little bit of that ability to kind of track what you're doing when you have to bring it outside of the scenario management framework. And then also to one of the things that we struggled with a little bit was the modeling anomalies. When you are putting these modifications together, specifically geometry ones, they don't always mesh in the correct way that you think they will once you actually get to the scenario. Sometimes if you're not deliberate with where that connection point is, once you have the scenario, the end of one link can be here and the end of the other link can be here, but they really should be here. And so that required a little bit of extra work and mindfulness. And one thing that we did note was you have to be a little bit deliberate with your signal controllers. If you have an existing base condition with like 10 signals, well, 10 intersections, but only 5 are signals, and one of your build includes adding a signal, another intersection, but that signal controller did not exist as just a dummy signal during your base conditions, it can cause some errors in your modification later on that will actually make your modification invalid and not openable. And then you have to, as you can see on the bottom here, kind of dive into the code and find where that change was in the modification to delete it out to make that modification be usable again.
Well, we have time for some questions, I think.